Kate, welcome to the future of fashion business. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to the conversation. Let's see, where shall we begin? Well, when I actually started this podcast a very long time ago, I took on the ambitious task of trying to introduce people for them, which I've noticed that it's hard enough to introduce yourself as a person. It's harder even to introduce somebody else. So can you just for the audience out there, for people out there that are listening that don't know who you are and what you do, can you just give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm Kate Nadolny. I'm currently CEO of Bandier. We are a women's active apparel company. I've been in the apparel space in retail for over 15 years now, focused on everything from planning, wholesale operations, finance, innovation, strategy, everything basically but design. You don't want me to design. And really have enjoyed being able to work at large companies, big brands, and now be able to work at a little bit of a smaller brand and get my feet wet doing something a little bit different.
Awesome. And I mean, when you're saying a little bit of a smaller brand, because I mean, that's quite relative based on where you worked at before, right? Because Bandier is, what is it, 100 team brand versus PVH Corp, which is thousands.
Yeah, yeah. We have, yeah, with our store team, about 100 people in our company. My previous team, my direct team at PVH North America was over 200 in my prior role. And yeah, PVH itself is tens of thousands of employees globally. So a very different setup. Prior to that, I worked at Lacoste, also huge multinational global company. And then same at VF. So always been in sort of those big behemoth brands.
Mm.
So it's nice to have a little bit of a different experience.
Yeah, and I just say that so that people can actually understand, because my audience is predominantly, aspiring fashion entrepreneurs. To them, a small brand might be their own, a
Yeah,
brand with
yeah,
like five
yeah,
people, a brand with
yeah.
like 10 people maximum or two people.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're talking about small brands at a global level, you're talking about, brands with 100 people. Awesome. So let's see. We usually have an introductory segment that is called fire questions. And the premise is I'm going to ask usually very difficult or broad questions that you're going to have only 10 to 15 seconds to answer. Quite
Okay.
exciting. Quite exciting things. All right. But let's see. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what do you think is overrated business advice that would apply specifically to the fashion space?
Oh, double down on what you know and stay in one particular field or function.
So you think that's overrated?
Very overrated. Yeah, I think you got to try a little bit of everything.
Interesting. Wow, I want to ask more about that. Let's see. Okay, and what do you think is underrated business advice in the fashion space?
Um, Finding a sponsor, not a mentor. Really having somebody who's sponsoring you in your career.
What are the differences between a sponsor and a mentor?
A mentor helps guide you. A sponsor advocates for you behind closed doors when you're not in the room.
Interesting. And what do you think is the biggest lie about the fashion industry in general?
Oh gosh, that it's all runway shows and parties and couture.
Yeah.
It's a lot of spreadsheets, not much different than a lot of other industries.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people like you in the industry, maybe a lot more than designers. I think
Yeah,
people don't really
absolutely.
realize that. Interesting. Yeah. I'm glad that you said that. It's actually why I started this podcast in the first place. Awesome. Let's see. What has been the luckiest moment in your career in hindsight?
Oh gosh, two. So the first luckiest moment was the very beginning of my career in retail. I started as an investment banker, and I was actually a subprime mortgage investment banker at Lehman Brothers in 2007, right before the
Woo!
crash.
Fun times.
So yeah, the stories are all true. So I quit and I wanted to work in fashion, didn't have any background or experience. So I cold called 200 companies. I heard back from probably 12 and got interviews with three, and ended up getting a second, third, and final round interview with Nautica, which at the time was owned at VF. So went to the Nautica interview, ended up interviewing with the CFO of Nautica at the time, and had a really great conversation with him. And he said, I want to be candid with you. I don't think you want this job. And I was 23 and I was brazen. And I said, you're right. I actually don't want this job. I want to work in the business. I want to be on the front end, but I'm hoping that you'll like me and maybe you'll put me somewhere else. And he laughed and he appreciated my candor and he sent me downstairs and I got a planning job on the spot. So that was sort of my first lucky moment because he could have been like, what do you mean you don't want this job? Get out of here. But, we had a good rapport. So I just kind of went for it to see what would happen. And I got lucky. And that's how I got started in the business. And I'd say my second lucky moment, if you call it luck again, was getting transferred to a lateral move at PVH in a job that I had no idea what it was going to be, what I was going to be doing. I moved from wholesale and merchandising into strategy. I was working for the vice chairman. I had no team. I had no direction. I had no real, I would say, scope other than get this business aligned and figure out how we can grow it. And so having, that kind of purview was amazing. And I think I was terrified to not have the direction, but I was really lucky that I took the opportunity and I was able to build my own path and build a strategy team for, that portion of PVH at the time.
Interesting. And when you're looking at that period and what you learned, because it was a very entrepreneurial experience, how can you relate the character traits and skill sets that you gained throughout that experience to where you're at today as a CEO of way larger corporations?
Yeah, it is just figuring out exactly what needs to happen and getting it done. I think that in a big corporate world, there's often a lot of, well, that's not my purview, that's not my remit. So and so manages that. I can't step on their toes, or well, that's not part of this roadmap. Being able to say, okay, I just need to figure out strategy, and I kind of have clean, carte blanche to be able to do it, was really empowering. And I think it made me say, I'm going to just look at everything. I'm going to become a student of this business. I'm going to understand where there's holes. I'm going to poke at them. I'm going to make people uncomfortable. And I continue to make people uncomfortable in my current role because I really look at that same sort of scope. Everything can be turned on its head, no matter how old or new, and no matter how successful or unsuccessful it is.
Interesting. And what's your favorite brand or fashion business and why? Other than Bandier, of course.
Other than Bandier, of course. I've always had a lot of connection to the brands that I've worked at. And so I've always kind of had that moment. Like when I took the job at PVH originally, I was working for Calvin Klein Underwear. And, I remember my first report card gift that my father got me when I was in high school. I got to pick it out and it was a pair of Calvin Klein jeans and I was so excited. So I had that emotional connection to the brand. So I think, in general, the brands I work at, I tend to have had that connection in order for me to feel like it's the right fit for me. Outside of that, I've just always loved Stella McCartney, what she's done, how she's built an amazing brand, being vegan, being sustainable, and not having to be put in a corner because that's her ethos, being able to still play with the bigger luxury brands.
Interesting. And what is the biggest mistake you would say you've made in your career?
Staying in a job too long when I knew it wasn't right.
Interesting. What were the signs that were telling you to make that decision? Emotional distress, or there was no way for you to know? It just happened sort of like the way it had to.
No, you just know. In your gut, like it doesn't feel right anymore. And you're phoning. For me, if I'm phoning it in, if I'm just doing the bare minimum. I was working with a wonderful, wonderful guy who was a mentor to me. And I was having a conversation with him in this job saying, not this job, the job I'm speaking of, saying, hey, I feel like I'm phoning it in. I feel like I'm not as passionate as I used to be. I'm probably doing the bare minimum. And he laughed and he said, well, the bare minimum for you is like the maximum for a normal person. So like nobody probably even notices. And so then I'm like, well, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I can just have a breath and have some balance and just, phone it in. But I was really unhappy. It was really distressful to me. And I think I stayed in the job too long, convincing myself either it would just get better on its own or I would bootstrap my way out of the feeling when I should have just said, I got to cut ties and do something else.
Right. Interesting. And when you're looking at the motivations behind your behavior and discipline and ethic and work ethic, Because I mean, your career speaks for itself, right? I mean, investment banking, 2008 to now CEO of PVH. I mean, definitely a person that works very hard, and that aspires to achieve a lot of things. Have you taken the time to analyze the why behind your behavior? Has it been a specific insecurity? Has it been more habit? Has it been biological wiring because of your parents and environment? What do you now that you've time to probably reflect upon that? What do you think is the cause of that?
I would say it's inherent, genetic,
Mm,
biological, and situational. So I'm a first generation college student. I knew very early on that I wanted to go to a really good school. I wanted to end up in a big city. I wanted to run a company. And, that wasn't something that was very much, modeled for me in my direct family. My family is amazing. They've done everything for me. I'm an only child. I'm very, very spoiled in that regard. But we didn't have a lot growing up, and I never even felt like that because they took such great care of me. But it was, whatever you want to do, we support you. And when I got into Cornell, we couldn't afford it, but it was like, okay, well, we'll figure it out, and you'll go, and we'll make it work. And my ability to just sort of say, I'm going to achieve this, I'm going to move on to the next thing was really important for me.
mm,
um, in high school, I was advised by my guidance counselor not to go to Cornell when I got in, because he said, you'll fit in fine academically, but socioeconomically you won't, and you're not going to have a positive experience because these are a different breed of people that you haven't
mm,
experienced in your life.
mm,
uh, so I was very pleased to send that particular guidance counselor a note when I graduated, as president of my class in college, so he could know I fit in just fine. And I think a little bit of that kind of beating the odds and kind of showcasing that I can bootstrap and I can do it on my own has always stuck with me throughout my career.
mm. Interesting. And now that you see this from at a very, very high level, probably through hiring a lot of different people, what do you think? I know that ideally you want both, right? You want the ethic and the character and also the smarts and the talent. But if you had to compare both of them now, what do you think is more important now? Is it the character traits, or is it the character traits and the perseverance, or your just ability to make smart decisions?
It's always perseverance. I think
Mm,
you can train people how to do many things,
right.
but you can't train people how to work hard and how to, think differently. You can't train people how to collaborate. You can't train people how to, have a personal investment in their career and what they do.
Mm,
And I think, as I've worked with more and more people, the people that I tend to continue to surround myself with are the people who are certainly we people, not I people.
mm,
Um, I have actually gotten the feedback, and I've worked on it, that I say we too much. I say we when I'm just referring to myself, because I was kind of ingrained, like we're a team. And they're like, hey, at some point you kind of have to say I, otherwise it seems like maybe you're not doing your job at this level. You have to say I. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll work on that. But I think
okay, we'll work on that. That
we'll
was
work
your
on that.
answer.
We'll work on that. But
Yeah.
other we people who it's
Yeah.
like, there's no finger pointing. There's no, it's just we hold each other accountable. We make each other sharper. That to me is really what I look for. And
Hmm.
that can't be taught.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very big struggle for a lot of people that are trying to start taking on, the responsibility of bringing on people into their lives, whether it is a job or, I mean, it's almost like bringing in a partner, right? You can't really change people. You can make them better, right? But that is up to each individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, most people that I've worked with, the ones that you give very candid, clear feedback to in the beginning and they take it really seriously are always the ones that end up, doing better. A lot of people,
Hmm.
when you give them very candid feedback, even if it's kind, they kind of talk their way out of it. They think how
Hmm.
it could not be their fault, or they blame another situation over there. And that to me is the biggest red flag. If I give
Yeah,
you
no
feedback,
accountability.
yeah, exactly. You just need to be like, okay, I'll take that. I'll work on it. That's it. That's the
Hmm.
answer.
Interesting. Okay, and since you've transitioned from, working with very large corporations to smaller corporations relatively, is your biggest role still that? Is it just figuring out and finding those types of people specifically for the right role and at the right situation and at the right time?
Yeah, the most important thing I think at my level is organizational design, because there's no way I could ever touch every part of the business.
Of course.
It's about building a high performance team. And I would say, again, a lot of the people that I've worked with who have been successful have been good at that. There's some people I've worked with who've been successful who aren't. There are some people I worked with who are, incredible people who are maybe too loyal, and they're a little too worried about, well, I've known this person forever, so they get a pass, instead of thinking about constantly saying, who's the right person for this job in this iteration of the company and the brand.
Yeah.
Sometimes that comes off as a little hard when somebody has done a great job up until a point, but just because you did a great job in this stage of the company, the brand, the strategy, doesn't mean you're the right person to take it forward. That's not always personal. I'm not the person you want to take a super steady 3% a year growth business and just sit behind the desk and push the paper. Like, I'm not, that's not going to excite me. So I'm not going to do the best job in that role. I want to give me something that's horribly broken to fix, or give me something that's brand new that I need to shape. And then I'll give it my all, and I'll be the right person for the job. But again, I think it's just about meeting people where they are in some cases.
Interesting. And when focusing on, being an organization engineer, which is, I guess, almost the role to describe it, how has it been different from bigger to smaller corporations?
Speed. We can make a decision and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We'll announce it next week. I'd say probably 5 major restructures at PVH in my last 3 years there. One or two before COVID, and then, the balance in COVID. And all of those were more challenging, even though there were more resources and more opportunities, because there was, a bigger ship to move. There's more bureaucracy. And, there was a little bit more of a challenge in terms of being able to get the right sign on to get things done. So those were, I think, very clear. Again, when you have a lot of resources and you need to either restructure, you have more cards you can shuffle in the deck to do different things, more options. If you're in a cost cutting mode, you have, obviously more costs you can cut and still be able to maintain what you need to run the core business. But just getting over the hurdle is so hard. The last restructure I did there, we started in July of 2021, and I don't think it's complete yet. So just a lot more movement, a lot more opinions, and a lot more, I think, just noise.
Interesting. So, yeah, so it's an interesting conundrum. It's almost as if you're a larger corporation, you have the freedom of access to resources, but you don't have the freedom of flexibility and speed. And on smaller corporations, you have the flexibility on speed and flexibility, but you don't have the freedom of resources.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly the case. You can do a lot faster. You don't always have the money to do it, though, or you don't always have the people to do it. And that's the challenge.
Interesting. And is that challenge solved through organization engineering mostly? So again, finding the right people for whatever the problem is. So in your ability to identify and diagnose the problem and then create a team around that problem.
Yeah, it's half of it. I think you can get through half of it through organizational design. The other half is truly resourcing. Like, you can only do so much with so little. So, you have to make sure if you get the right people in the right spot, you can do a lot more than you could otherwise. And you can do a lot more with a lot less, but, there comes a point where you still have to, have the resource conversations, and you can only, cost cut yourself to success to a point before it's really just about, the strategy, growing the business, being innovative, and driving the top line. I think that's a key thing that everyone's feeling and has been feeling, coming out of COVID is, everyone's like, oh, we can just be leaner. We can just be leaner. And you can only be leaner to a point. Right. And then you start to sacrifice your business. So it's about the right people, but it also is about the right resources.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't save your way to $1 billion.
You cannot.
Interesting. And can you take us through your decision-making process of when you're sort of like molding this organizational machine? What is the first step? Is it identifying problem, identifying potential candidates to solve this problem, making those candidates compete versus like how do you craft that machine yourself? What's your process?
I think the first thing is just really understanding each person in the role, and if they're even in the right role to begin with, like what's their skill set, what's their background, and then marrying that back to what the business needs. Realistically, that takes 90 days to do, but you rarely have that kind of luxury. In some cases, it's been okay. I have to make this decision like my first week, so I spend a little bit of time with this person, understand what they were able to accomplish so far, understand what they're good at. I've gotten feedback from others about them. And, it's clear this person is probably not a good fit. You just got to make a decision and move on. I think one of the worst things you can do in organizational design is keep someone either in general or in the wrong role for too long. You're doing them a disservice when you do that as well. I think the best thing you can do is just say, hey, I don't think this is a fit for you. Again, nothing is personal, but we need to move on, or we need to change you over here, and this is how we need to do it. Again, it takes time, but you often don't have that luxury. So it's about making those quick decisions. It's about saying, all right, what are the key things that I need to know about this particular person's skill set? And am I red light or green light on it? And if I'm mostly green lights, we'll keep moving. If I'm mostly red, we got to stop.
Interesting. And what benchmarks do you use to measure if a person is performing or underperforming? Early benchmarks, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some of the roles you can look at just the overall success, but in general, it's asking a couple of key questions. One thing I think about, like, so for example, in marketing, like asking a marketing person, you come in, you have like a CMO. It's not the what, but it's the why. So why is your marketing budget structured this way? So, and then if the answer is, well, that's what I was given, or that's how it was always done, like, all right, red flag. If it's, hey, it's because we feel really strongly about this and that, but our plan B is that, then I'm like, oh, okay, green light. They kind of know what they're talking about here. And then asking, well, why did you structure your organization that way? Again, I'm using marketing as an example. So, well, I think brand strategy should own these things because of this and blah, blah, blah. That's great. Somebody who just says, oh, well, I knew somebody who was good at this, so I created this department and had them run it. And I, didn't know what to do with this person, so I gave them this. And I'm like, all right, red light, like red flag again. Here we go. Like this is not strategic and thoughtful.
Interesting.
In many cases, some of the departments that are underperforming have all green flags, and it's just because they haven't gotten the right support, the right resourcing, and the right roadmap to be able to execute. So you can't always look at the actual performance metrics. In some cases, people can fall into success. In other cases, people can be completely hindered because they haven't had the right leadership too.
Interesting. So it's almost like they themselves create those benchmarks. Your role is just to get them out of them.
Yeah, it's to me, again, it's not the what, or it's just the why.
Right.
Okay, so asking why on 3 big things usually will tell you, does this person have the chops for what you need them to do or not?
And how do you handle when you're trying to organize something or somebody in a specific topic where you don't know anything about? Is it more about trusting the person more than their skill set? Because I mean, of course, you can look at their CV and see if they have the experience and this and that, but at the end of the day, you don't know anything about the industry. So how do you quantify that?
Right. I would say you have to know enough to be dangerous, right? So you have to make sure that you know kind of what the whys should even be, right? You don't have to go too deep to know that. And I think if you don't, that's okay. I mean, many people in senior roles don't know every single line function, but I think what you can do is, first you can spend some time on how that person leads their team, right? Is their team happy, well organized? Do they love that leader or not? Is a good kind of just litmus test, because if you have, let's say, 5 or 10 other people saying, hey, I'm happy, that probably says this person is good. But it's also using your network. If I don't know an answer to something, I go to a functional expert who does, ask a friend in design and say, hey, I need to evaluate my designer's success. I know some of the more generic benchmarks, like what's their adoption ratio and, how successful are their designs out commercially. But what else should I be asking? And once I get those kind of answers, then it's okay. These are the couple of whys I want to add to that to evaluate.
Interesting. And what would be, and this is simplifying the question, of course, and generalizing it a lot, but what would be your go-to KPIs to see if you're building the organizational machine correctly? Is it sales? Is it revenue? Is it customer satisfaction? What is your guiding light?
It's all of it. But I think it's to start, obviously everything takes time. So to start, it's throughput. Are you seeing results with work product, which isn't necessarily sales? Sometimes sales take 6 to 12 months to happen. In fashion, your product lead cycle is at least 12 months. So, you can't evaluate a product team because you may be 6 months behind the person who actually did the design. So it's more about throughput. It's okay. Are we asking the right questions? Are we focusing on the right things? Are we starting to see success again in, hey, we were overdeveloping and we identified it, and now we're developing at the right level from a design perspective. Oh, okay, great. That's, we may not be selling the product yet, but the product may not be on the floor yet. So that's a good indicator. We're asking the right questions. We've relooked at all of our metrics and we're saying, hey, you know what? We were evaluating all of our marketing efforts on ROAS, but we think based on our current strategy, we need to be focused on CAC, and here's how we target it, and here's how we're thinking. Great. That's a good sign. Like, things are going to be working well, even if you haven't seen the ROI and the marketing spend quite yet, because you need to ramp up. So it's all about, like, are the right questions being asked? Are you getting to the right whys? And are you seeing the right throughput on some of these different things that are indicators of future success, which is, it's all about the revenue, right? Because customer satisfaction drives revenue.
Right.
All of those other kind of metrics really are about, like, you're going to see it in your sales number.
Interesting. Yeah, just so that people out there that don't know, customer satisfaction tends to be revenue because it beats the revenue in the long term, versus revenue is a very short term, sort of like sales figure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what foundational beliefs, what foundational principles do you have to know which whys are whys that are good and which whys are whys that are bad? Because there has to be some solid foundation for your decision making, right?
Yeah, some of it is human nature. If you're asking somebody why and they don't know, you got to be able to read them. You got to be like, okay, this person's grasping at straws here. This person's making stuff up. They don't know what they're doing. That's pretty clear, I would say, pretty early on. And another thing I've noticed, and I noticed this recently with someone, that there was constantly like a turning it back. Like, when it was like, well, what do you think about this strategy? Or how did you come to, well, what do you think of that type of thing? Or how would you manage it? Almost like trying to play like a reverse interview. And then you're like, wait a minute, why are you turning this back on me when I'm asking the question? You're deflecting. So some of the ways of evaluating it are really just about understanding the person's sort of reaction to these questions and seeing if they're confident or not. And then part of it is just, again, like, some very baseline things that you can always ask people, no matter what their function is, like their thoughts about the budget, their thoughts about some of their key metrics, which you can always ask, again, an expert in the field to say, hey, what are the key metrics I should be looking for in marketing? Oh, there are these things. Okay, that's what I'm going to ask about.
And why?
And the why. Yeah, exactly. And why. But those are the types of things that, like, it doesn't take a lot to be able to read somebody and know, again, this person's on the right path, that this person's not.
Interesting. And what would you suggest people become more familiar in when becoming more qualified to make these types of decisions? Because this is very advanced, right? So for people that maybe might be starting out, it might come across as very overwhelming. So if you had to simplify, and again, the very complex sphere of fashion business into the 1 or 2 or 3 most important principles for people to understand early on, what do we think would those be? Would those be understanding people, understand unit economics, and understand the marketplace and trends? What would you sort of like boil everything down to if you had to generalize it?
Yeah, I think your first one's spot on. It's understanding people. So that could mean your customers, that can mean your team, that can mean your stakeholders, your vendors. Like, understanding people is critical. Really understanding your margin. So one of the biggest issues that I've seen in turnarounds with businesses, big or small, is the margin calculations not being right and people not being focused on the margins. At the end of the day, if you don't have profitable sales, you don't have a long-term operating business. And I think just margin in general is sort of the first place you need to start. And then I think the last piece is, again, asking a lot of questions. Usually you learn more asking questions than you do answering questions. So the number one thing you should constantly be doing is ask questions. Know your people, understand your margin, and just ask a ton of questions.
Interesting. And similarly, now that we've spoken a little bit about organization design, when talking about margins, what are your dominating principles, or what's the same question that I asked before? What's your decision-making process like? What are the variables that you take sort of like into consideration mostly?
Yeah, starting from the bottom. So I think it's very easy to start from the top and say, oh, I'm going to sell $100 a product. My cost of goods is 40, so I'm making $60 and just kind of going down, down, down. It's much easier to say and to start with, I need to make $10 on an item. To make $10 on an item, I can only pay X amount because I know that I'm selling to Macy's and they're only going to pay Y amount. And I also have to factor in all these other costs, and I have to do this. And then you build it back up and you say, oh, okay, so for this to work, I need to be selling X amount, right? Because it's very easy to talk yourself into making it up. I have a $10 million business. How can I not make money on $10 million? I'm making $6 million of gross margin. I can figure this out. It's very hard to say, okay, I have to make $1 million. To make $1 million, and if I'm spending this and I'm doing this, wait a minute, I need to actually sell $15 million of sales, right? So you kind of can talk yourself out of finding problems when you look top down, but when you actually build, hey, I want to go to my point Z and build backwards, you catch a lot more things than you do if you just start at A and try to move forward.
Right. So measure things on a micro scale instead of a macro scale if you're looking at things from a product perspective. So maybe just have a good dynamic with your first customer, right? Yeah. Instead of trying to dream about what you're going to have. You have 10 million customers.
Exactly. Yeah. What do you have? What's broken? How can you fix it? What's working? How do you maximize it? And how do you make sure that at the end of the day, like you're being really mindful and thoughtful about every dollar you're spending and what the real return is on that dollar.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's just like you said, is start from the bottom and then also ask the right questions. How can we get this to make more money, right? Relative to our values and the company and its vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very easy, especially in mostly direct to consumer businesses, just be like, well, we can take the price up. It's fine. We can never, we never want to de-engineer the product. Of course we don't. We can just take the price up. We'll get the margin we need. And it's like, that's not really true. Like what truly is important. One of the things when building product, I always think is interesting is people have one of two thoughts. Either they de-engineer the product to a place where it's just not valuable anymore, or they're so insistent that the product value is in every little detail and they can't be changed. It's really something in between. So it's, okay, if I have this great item, I know it's working. What are the 3 things that make this item great? It's the fabric, it's the stitching, it's the buttons. Okay, great. So those 3 things I won't change because those are the things that make it great. Everything else I can, right? Because at the end of the day, like if the customer's buying it because it has great fabrication, you can touch the fit a little bit and be okay. And it's a little bit of trying to make sure you're not talking yourself out of changing something, but it's also not saying, oh, I need that to be half the price, so just do what you got to do to get it to that place. So how do you build product that is kind of that middle ground of keeping the very core things of that product, keeping them true and not touching them, but then having the willingness to kind of touch the other pieces so that you're kind of finding that nice compromise into what can make that product work for you financially, but not, degrade the brand and the product and the customer experience.
Interesting. So it's looking at the product, asking how can this be improved from a margins perspective? Okay, how can we keep more money from this product? And then understanding the customer and what they value on the product. Don't touch the most important things and identify the ones that you could be a little bit more flexible on to increase margins.
Yep, exactly. And I think that that's it's a product kind of mantra in thinking about creating product, but I think it's in life, right? What are the things that you have to hold inherently true? And if you have to hold everything true, you're probably not being honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give everything up, you're probably in the wrong situation. It's what are the three things that matter? In any situation on any piece of product, focus on the three things that matter and you'll be in a great spot.
And how do you usually find the three things that matter? Is it through customer experience and interviews? Is it through just intuition and understanding your brand and your vision? How do you make those? Because that's a very difficult decision to make.
It's asking. It's just asking. It's asking why. Why do you buy this product? What do you love about this product? And they may not say, the waistband's most important, but they may say, it really makes me feel great because I don't have any, muffin top. I really love these leggings because they lay really flat. Okay, so what you're saying is you love the waistband. Got it. Can't change that. You don't have to ask direct questions. You need to just sort of see how the customer experiences a product, and then they'll pretty much tell you, what they like and what they don't in so many words.
Interesting. Okay, I'm just trying to sort of like digest everything that we've spoken about so far. Interesting. And based on everything that we've discussed so far, how do you apply that into, because what essentially is going on with Bandier is I'm guessing it's a turnaround situation or more than a turnaround situation, maybe like a rebirth of the brand, right? A repositioning, right? Yeah. So when it comes to repositioning brands that were already pre-established, are the purpose of those important questions to re-identify what made the brand great in the first place, or it's questions that need to be asked on what's going to make the brand great in the future? So are the questions trying to explore the past for answers, or they're trying to explore the future for answers?
So I'll answer that by starting with one of the key things that drove me to accept this particular role was that the brand was great and the customers, even the customers who didn't transact anymore, still thought the brand was cool. So one of the toughest things you could ever try to do is take a brand that isn't working and that the customer doesn't understand or doesn't like and change their minds a 180 and get them to love it. So the brand being good was something that I'm like, we can do this no matter what's underneath, no matter what's happening, no matter how we need to change things. The brand is good. People like the brand. The core target market that knows the brand likes the brand. There's nobody who says, I hate Bandier. What we found is there are people who say, I love the brand or I don't know the brand because we don't have enough range. So to me, that's a relatively easier problem to fix. So I think it starts there. And then it's, okay, great. We have a brand that you love. So there's something that you were doing right. So what were we doing right? Maybe we're not doing it anymore, but what were we doing right at one point? And what are the key things that people kind of rely back on and talk about? What were the most successful collaborations? What were the most successful campaigns? And what are the kind of commonalities underneath that? So then you kind of get into the, okay, great. What's working is, it's fashion. It's truly something that's unique. It's a very high fashion editorial way of talking about fitness apparel, which doesn't normally happen. It's unexpected products that you wouldn't normally find in apparel, fitness apparel, like those types of things. Okay, that's what made people excited about the brand. That's what made it great. Let's make sure that we keep those tenets. Then it's what's not working, right? Then it was, okay, well, there hasn't really been a lot of consistency in the product. There hasn't been, consistency in the storytelling, okay, great. These are the things we need to fix. So it's taking a little bit of both, but I think really understanding what made the brand successful was critical for us to be able to use those pillars as our foundation to build on newness for the future and understand what are future trends. How do we need to tweak the model to make it work and be even more profitable for the future? Those are the things that we then focus on after that. But truly, if the brand wasn't good, if everyone was like, yeah, I don't get that brand. Yeah, I don't like that brand. I don't think I would have taken the job. Because it's very hard to fix a brand that's already gone the wrong direction.
So rediscovering your past to build your future.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't fix the stuff that's not in need of fixing.
And when you're analyzing brands that maybe are just under that just haven't been taken care of in a while versus the brands that don't or changing can be very, very difficult. I mean, public sentiment is, as you said, it's almost impossible to change because if there's really very little that you can do. It almost has to happen automatically or on its own. What other unfixable problems that a lot of people try to fix are you aware of, or have you personally come across of?
If you've taken a brand down market and all of a sudden you want to take it back up market again,
Hmm.
that to me is a really tough. That's a really tough thing that a lot of brands who have gone from more like high and mid tier down have tried to do and just can't be successful, because making it up, once you end up in more of a mass space, it's very hard for your customer to not affiliate your brand with that particular retailer or that particular price point. And all of a sudden they feel like they're being taken advantage of. Like, wait a minute, this was a $25 shirt that I used to get at JC Penney, and now you're trying to sell it to me for $250 at Neiman Marcus. Like, I don't understand. So when you're trying to do that and make those moves, I think a lot of leaders are very hopeful and optimistic that they can kind of change it. No, we'll change the positioning, we'll change the campaign, we'll change the product. The customer will understand the value. Customers already anchored themselves in lower price point, lower distribution. Like, trying to take it back up again it's very hard. And I think it's underrated.
And interesting. And what logic do those leaders make behind those decisions? What's the irrational logic behind that?
Yeah, I think the issue is that it is on paper logic, and it's not thinking enough about
Right. I mean, you're going to make more money in
human.
this next 6 months, but yeah.
Yeah. I think it's, you look at it and you say, oh, great. Okay. So if I have, if I'm making it up, if I have brand X and they're, lower price point, my product's aesthetics very similar to Burberry. If I increase the quality to be the same at Burberry, and I still have a good brand name, I should be able to sell that product that's, at that same price point. Not thinking to themselves like, no, the customer already has associated you and they've anchored on something that's lower. I think that's really the issue. It's that, people really think, like, on paper, if I do that, it makes perfect sense on paper, right? You have a value proposition with a well-known brand name. You have the right competitive set you're going after. You're like, this makes sense. This is what you should charge for this. This is like the relative value of the product. We're going to put it in the place where relative value of that product sells, and we're going to make it work. It makes sense rationally, but humans are not rational animals. And so as shoppers, they come in and they're like, why is this here? This belongs here. And to get people out of that pattern is very, very hard.
Yeah. And then you condition people, because I mean, it's lower discounts feel like an opportunity, but price increases feel like a scam from a human nature perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. The other side of that coin, I would say, is if it works here, it'll work there. So a lot of big global brands say, we sell a ton of this, product at this price point with no problem in Europe. Why can't you just sell the exact same product in the US? It's the same demographic. It's a 40-year-old man
who makes humans.
You should be able to sell it. We don't need to tweak it. It's working. We have a proven case that it's working. Go sell it in the American market or go sell it in the Asian market. That's also something that, when you say it that, I think blatantly, people are like, well, that's not what I mean. But that is what they mean. And they do that quite well. Global brands do that all the time. They say, we're going to have a global line, global product house, and everything's going to come through this, and it's all going to be uniform. It's going to be globally succinct, and the customer's going to understand it. The customer's not.
And I mean, why don't they? Because I mean, biologically, humans are all the same, right? But what variables make the results different? Is it cultural? Is it political?
It's environmental. I think it's environmental. So, first of all, there's cachet with, different brands have different value in different locations because they're foreign, for example. So a US brand in many cases does better in Asia and can carry a higher price point because it's, not a local brand, and vice versa. A European brand is like considered high end in America, even though it may not really be, because it's European. So there's just like that, like, I would say, overall sentiment that clouds the consumer's judgment. But it's also about the environment in which customers are trained. The US customer has been trained for 40 years that things go on sale, things are discounted, they should never buy things at full price. And so just saying, well, now you're going to, like, they're like, no, that doesn't make sense. And that's been the market that it's been for a long time.
And is it productive to even try to understand those factors, or is it just a trial and error process?
No, I mean, I think you have to understand those factors when you're thinking about how you're positioning your brand. But I think it's more so saying, okay, if I want to get over here and I want to take my product up in price and I want to increase the value, I can't do it overnight. I have to, take a small price increase and have a lot of value associated with it. So the customer's kind of like, oh, this is nice and it's not more expensive. Okay, I get it. And they start to buy it. And then you can start to work your way up in price and in value as you go. It's just about, it's not a quick overnight turn. It's about making sure that you're kind of training that customer, re-anchoring them on different points in their decision-making process to get them to be able to think differently about your products.
Interesting. But this is more at the growth stage of a brand, right? Not necessarily in a repositioning stage. Reposition is, again, just focusing on what worked in the past, and then what's going to work in the future is what you're going to build based on what you discover in the past, but still thinking about understanding different cultures internationally and how to position your brand there is more of a challenge for different days, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think a lot of brands that are trying to reposition themselves in a particular market are in that same place. They're like, okay, a lot of European brands are like, my American customer, my American market is underpenetrated and the price point's too low and there's more we should be doing. We have to reset it. I think it happens in all different forms, right? So it doesn't just happen in a brand repositioning in general. It happens with a, brand trying to grow. It happens with a brand trying to change its customer segment. It happens with a brand, trying to redeploy a different regional strategy. Kind of all of those same tactics tend to be where a lot of leaders rely. And they're not wrong. And again, they're right on paper. It's just how you approach it and how you make sure you think about the customer psychology behind it.
Interesting. Okay. And going back to what we're just discussing about pricing, because I think that is the problem for a lot of early on entrepreneurs. So what general but roughly correct piece of advice would you give a person that's starting off? Is it, hey, focus on, you need at least 50% margin, right? Or what sort of like very broad general piece of advice that might be reliable could you give somebody that's starting out? Because general advice is almost never always reliable, right? Because business is just so complex. But what piece of advice do you feel comfortable enough in saying, yeah, you know what, in order to simplify and summarize the complexity of pricing, focus on these two things when you're starting out?
I mean, this is not going to answer your question well, but it always assumes something's going to take twice as long and be 30% more expensive. It's always my rule of thumb. Anytime and that's in life. That's, in product development, that's in contracting, that's in anything. It's going to take twice as long and it's going to be at least 30% more than you think. So if you use that mantra, you think to yourself, okay, I need to bake in more time. And I also need to assume I'm going to be spending 30% more money. You're usually in a place where you're spot on. And if you're not, hopefully you're in a good place and you actually are in a better spot. But I think many times people rationalize to themselves like, okay, like for example, I need at least a 50% margin. Well, that's a really loaded way to think about it, because that doesn't mean anything unless you say, where are you selling it? Because if you're selling it online, you need more than a 50% margin, right? If you're selling it online and you have to pay for the ever increasing expense of Google ads and Meta, and you have to pay for the ever increasing expenses of shipping
of everything. Yeah.
Then you're like, your margin, like then you need an 80. You need your margin to be an 80. If you're selling to wholesale, like it's not just, oh, I need a 50 margin. It's, well, how much am I paying in co-op marketing? Am I giving back markdown money? Do I have to take returns, and do I have to factor in the cost of freight? So it's not actually, I probably need to make, 40 points of margin, but that's net of every expense I need to have. Okay, well, are you sure what all those expenses are? So it's very hard to make that sort of statement, because that basically the higher the margin and the more you cushion yourself, the better off you're going to be.
Of course. Yeah. So it's more a matter of asking. A better mantra would be, am I making money now? And if the answer is yes, if I'm making money now, am I keeping money now? And the answer is no, is turn that into a yes. How do I turn that into a yes? If I'm making money now and the answer is yes, then the question evolves to, how do we continuously keep making and keeping more money?
Correct. And the
so
answer
it's solved by growth, not by having a specific number.
Correct. And it's whether you are making money and you want to make more, or you're not making money and you need to get to break even, start with your biggest expense and go down from there. So figure out exactly what your biggest expense is. My guess is your biggest expenses are your payroll, your marketing, and your warehousing and logistics. Those are probably your three biggest line item expenses, no matter what, if you have a business that has a big e-commerce presence. So start with the one that's the biggest and say, okay, am I being mindful, thoughtful here? It may not be that you're going to cut something. It may be that you want to change it. Right. So
is this person in the right position? Is this person performing as they should? Yeah.
Exactly. You may not want to cut your marketing budget, but you may want to redeploy it across different channel strategies. You may have all of your money sitting in bottom of the funnel digital marketing tactics because you can measure that, right? That's a drug that I've definitely been on before, which is, okay, if I have a very small marketing budget and I need to get quick returns, I'm going to push all my spending down to the bottom of the funnel where I can get last click attribution really clearly. And I can see, okay, when I spend $1, I make $2. Does that work for me? I know what my threshold is, and I can run it that way. And that is really satisfying because you're churning it out and you understand it. But eventually it starts to not work as well. And you're like, oh, that's not great. Well, it's because you've pushed all your money down the funnel. So you're not spending any money on consideration and on awareness. And so, your pool is smaller, so you're not getting as much out of that pool. That's a really easy sort of
short term. It's a short term. It's short term dopamine because it's just like I put the coin in and I get the candy back in 5 seconds. It feels good. I'm eating the candy. I sense that I'm getting my money's worth because I'm eating the candy. But if you do that for a very long period of time, you'll start getting fat.
Yeah,
and then exactly. Wow, I can't eat the candy anymore. Why? Why is it,
Interesting. Exactly. So I think, that's where looking at your different strategies in your marketing budget and making sure you have the right ratio, right? You're not 100% on bottom of the funnel tactics, but you're also not spending, as a small business, you're not spending half your money on awareness because you just don't have the runway to be able to spend that kind of money and, wait for the candy to come. So how do you balance that? And then the other piece is that I think everyone kind of always forgets is that middle of the funnel consideration piece. So, people are focused on, I just need more eyeballs. And when I get the eyeballs, then I'll be able to have them and I'll convert them. And it's like, well, that's not true, right? You're going to get a lot of eyeballs that are really qualified customers. And if you don't have that middle of the funnel strategy where you're engaging them in the right way to get them to really consider shopping and really be able, to start to poke around and think about your brand, you're never going to get them to conversion. And so I would say a lot of brands tend to also only be focused on those two pieces of their marketing strategy versus really digging into that consideration and how do you already take people who have great brand awareness of your brand and get them to be more likely to purchase.
Interesting. Okay. Well, before I ask you a question on diversifying your strategy and your focus, I do want to just wrap up the pricing section a little bit more. When it comes to understanding pricing and if you're doing it properly, or if you have, if your approach to margins is healthy, do you start with the costs or do you start with the revenue? So do you price? Is it more important to understand how to price your product higher, or is it more important to understand how to keep cost low? And again, the answer is obviously both, right? But if you have to pick and choose one of them, if you're early on entrepreneur with little resources, with little knowledge, what would you go for first and why?
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a quicker return if you're managing your costs more effectively, because you have to do a little bit of trial and error to be able to get your prices up. If you're trying to be more expensive than the balance of the market, you have to understand your positioning. You have to understand your storytelling. You have to understand your overall value prop and how you're communicating that to the customer. And that may not work at first. Then you have to pivot. And at that whole time, you're just burning cash, right? So if you can, at first,
high risk, high reward.
Yeah, you can just have, at first, if you can just start with a really crisp price, you still have a great value to your product, but you've taken out kind of all of the fat, you're in a much better spot. Because especially smaller brands, cash is king. At the end of the day, you could have a fantastic strategy, but if it takes you 3 months to get there and you don't have 3 months of cash,
it doesn't matter. Yeah,
doesn't matter.
Of course. Yeah. So focus on, pricing is higher risk, higher reward. Costs are lower risk, lower reward. And as a startup brand with limited resources, you should try to risk as little as possible and have as much consistency established as possible, because you need cash flow, consistent cash flow to survive.
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, now jumping back into the diversifying conversation, because it's also it's a similar question, but when understanding, do you think that as a startup brand, as a startup entrepreneur, first you need to establish the few reliable channels that work for you, and once you've developed consistency in those channels, then it's important to start diversifying? Or should you start diversifying as quickly as possible? Again, because young brands and young entrepreneurs always find themselves in this problem, right? Is I understand that I need to diversify, but that takes a lot of resources. And because I'm small, I don't have a lot of resources, whether they'll be time, team, financial. So is focus on a short term the answer to that problem?
So it depends the cycle that kind of the overall market is in, and where you're starting as a brand. So you obviously, in general, as a rule, you want to say, what's the most I can get for this dollar? So if the most I'm going to get for this dollar as a small brand is investing it back into my digital business, because for my digital business tomorrow, I'll get $2, but I'll only get $1.50 out of my retail channel and only get the dollar back out of wholesale in a very short amount of time. When cash is king and you're managing your business that way, you should be putting that dollar back where you're going to get the $2 versus the $1. That said, if you have a little bit more wiggle room, if your business is solid online and you can invest a little bit and keep it growing and keep it moving, and you have an opportunity to diversify in this particular market, I think diversification is critical for a few reasons. One, the digital business,
Unpredictability.
Yeah, well, part of it is just the digital business has become so much more expensive than it used to be. So again, all of the power is sitting with the Googles and the Metas in terms of what they're charging you. It's not as ROI accretive as it used to be. You have the compounding forces of really expensive labor when it comes to logistics. So all of that kind of stuff makes your digital business like tougher to scale, right? You're inherently, if you're running a good business in digital and you're small, if you're in a good digital business and you're small, you're probably going to make more money in stores because you're not going to get the economies of scale that's going to get you where you need to get overnight. So, okay, great. Let's look at stores. Can you open stores for a very reasonable price? I think the biggest mistake people make opening stores is paying too much for rent and location. So people are like, it's right around the corner from that great place, but it's not that great place. Don't rent it. Don't get yourself into a 10-year lease if you're not sure, right? So like there's opportunities for you to maybe try some things in retail. You're going to make more margin there if you can do it right. And then the other side of the coin, I feel like wholesale, especially in COVID, I feel like wholesale got such a bad rap and everyone's like, we're going to go direct. And they want to go direct because they want their customer data. Totally agree. You need to have a direct component to get that customer data. But wholesale isn't just about economies of scale. It's also free marketing. I mean, my God, if you are only in 20 locations in your own store and all of a sudden, you could double your store count by being in a Macy's in 20 new locations where you haven't had your product in front of the customer before, why wouldn't you want to put that product in front of the customer? Why wouldn't you want to have that opportunity to gain that customer, be it not directly, but be it in a way that's really impactful to reaching a new demographic or expanding? It's relatively low cost. You're not paying to set up the Nordstrom. You're just going into the Nordstrom. So being able to do that and to leverage that to get, again, awareness, it's almost like free awareness, again, as long as you know what you're doing and you know how to manage that channel appropriately for profitability.
Interesting. So it's looking at profitability and seeing how it relates to each channel and seeing which channel is being the most profitable now. And then once you figure that out, double down on that for a while. And once you have the cash flow necessary to diversify, you start doing that, because what to focus on is all relative, right? I mean, I think that the biggest issue is that people expect that specific answer, a specific strategy, but everything is just relative to the planet and the world and human nature. And you cannot plan for that. There's no theories, there's no facts. It's just a matter of, okay, understanding what's going on now and finding and adapting to the right strategy that you should apply to it. Because again, now we're having the wholesale conversation, right? 2 years ago during COVID, we wouldn't be having that wholesale conversation. If you were an entrepreneur, you shouldn't be having that wholesale conversation, but now you should, right? So it's more a matter of having that decision-making process more than, okay, what's the thing that I have to do?
Completely. And it's monetize your assets. So it's tough for small brands, but in some cases, small brands, let's say you have a really great small swimwear brand that's taking off, that's exciting. It's going to be too much for you to try to make beach towels and sunscreen, but can you license it? And is there an opportunity there for you to get some passive income? Like, that's interesting. Let's say you have a store location that you have more space than you need, or you're paying too much. Can you use that space to do something else with, another brand? Or can you do it with for an event? Like, think about how you can also monetize what you have, even if it's working. Like, why not? Like, if you have something that can help you out, you should do it. If you have a skill set within your team that you're really good at, and you have a little bit of capacity, could you help other brands that aren't direct competitors do that too, and earn a little bit more capital on the side to do that? Now, as much as you don't want to lose focus, because the furthest thing you want to have is shiny object syndrome and get yourself pulled in too many directions. But if you have an asset that can bring in more capital, and that capital can be used to fuel your business, you should monetize that asset.
Interesting. And if you had to put a number on that, the distribution of that focus, would it be 80% focus on, what works, and 20% on testing? Or is it 90-10? What would be sort of like your ratio?
I mean, I think it's more so whatever percentage you have to keep things moving, and then what's your discretionary. 80-20 is probably a good rule, but I would say most entrepreneurs probably only have about 5% of discretionary spend to be able to test and grow. It's just the nature of the beast, and trying to make sure you're managing your capital appropriately.
Of course, yeah, and most businesses never get to that position in the first place. They're just struggling to survive, or to just continuously figure stuff out.
Exactly. And the best thing, again, you can always do is, as much as you want to test, if you know something's going to work, if you know something is going to give you $2 and it could give you $5, or it more likely is going to give you 0, go after the 2 until you have a little bit more wiggle room. Don't play the big risk game until you can absolutely lose without losing your shirt.
Yeah, this is not gambling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that where it's like, no, we're going to win big if we do. And it's like, yeah, but you're like crush your brand, and it's one thing if you have no other options, right? But if you have opportunities that are more consistent ROI based, like, why wouldn't you?
Very interesting. Okay. So just to sort of conclude everything that we've spoken about, it's number 1 is about organization engineering, understand people and who are the right people to solve specific problems. Number 2 is the importance of pricing. Number 3 is the importance of asking the right questions. And then number 4 that we just added would be how to diversify your decision making, or your strategy, or your focus productively.
Yeah, I think, and the biggest takeaway too, again, as a smaller entrepreneur, is cash is king, and make sure that at the end of the day, make decisions that are going to keep you going.
Interesting. Okay, and in hindsight, looking at all of our conversation and everything that we've spoken about so far, would cash is king be the last piece of advice? The one thing that you think everybody should really understand is the importance of cash, because all your decisions will be relative to your cash situation?
For new brands, for entrepreneurs in this environment, yes, cash is king.
Interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you say this environment, can you describe what this environment means from somebody with your perspective? Is it an aggressive environment? Is it an interesting? What word would you use to describe it right now, and why?
I mean,
unpredictable.
Dilutive. I mean, raising capital is expensive. Raising money is hard. Valuations are coming in low. So you might have been able to get, $1 million for 10% of your business 2 years ago. And now if you need that $1 million, you might have to give up 50%. So, the entire, I would say, kind of capital matrix around this industry and where things are coming in, it's just fundraising is tough. And that's why I kind of lean on that cash is king comment, because cash is so much more expensive than it used to be it because debt is more expensive, be it because you have to give up more equity, be it because it takes more time because there's more competition to get the few dollars that are out there. It's very important in this environment for entrepreneurs to manage their cash and be able to do as much as they can without having to continuously fundraise.
Interesting. And what do you think is a good thing? Firstly, what do you think is a bad thing about going through a period like this?
I mean,
let's start with the bad things, and then with the good things.
Yeah. You potentially are going to miss out on opportunities, right? Because you have to be a little bit more risk averse than you'd like to be. And maybe in a different environment, you could raise a little bit more capital and do something that could really propel the growth of your business. You may have to miss that opportunity here just to keep the lights on because capital is so expensive. On the flip side, I mean, it certainly trains you, right? It makes you understand how to be lean and mean. It makes you understand the fundamentals really well. It makes you really become a student of your business because there's no room for error. And that makes you somebody who, as capital kind of opens back up and there's more opportunities, you're going to be the most well poised to take advantage of that.
So, I mean, it's definitely not spring. It's definitely not summer. But is the current landscape winter or is it fall?
I think we're in winter already. I think it hopefully will be getting better soon. I mean, who's to say? Nobody has a crystal ball. I know that the overall conversations have been there's a lot of thought that will be coming out of this soon. But who's to say?
And it is all cyclical, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen this one way or another, in different ways throughout your career.
Absolutely. 100% this is cyclical. I mean, there were brands that, 10 years ago when D2C brands were hopping up and they were all the rage, they were getting 10, 15 times their revenue when they were getting, investments. And now, brands are getting half their revenue in their valuations if they're lucky. But that'll come back again too. It'll absolutely come back again. But I think it also has to do with, it has to do with the cycle of the market and where we are, financially, but it also has to do with, where we are in terms of, the cycle of brands, right? There was that huge D2C moment where a lot of brands came up. They were focused on e-commerce. E-commerce was thriving. They capitalized on it. Now e-commerce is becoming less important. People are coming out of COVID. They want to see store experiences. So now, okay, different types of brands are going to come into the mix. People are going to start to give better valuations to brands that have more physical assets in retail because they can capture the customers more cheaply and they can, obviously monetize those assets. So I think that it's all going to just continue to be that roller coaster as it tends to be.
And what have been the most consistent lessons, consistent variables that you've seen throughout your career? Because I mean, I'm specifically very interested in asking you this question because you live with very close proximity with the 2008 crisis. And I'm guessing in one way it was sort of like a similar thing, right? Just crazy amounts of money, envy, greed, fast growth. So has there been any consistency in the cycles that you've noticed? And again, we're not predicting the future here, but just learning from the past.
Yeah, it just all comes back around, right? So tons of spending, then people, obviously crisis happened, everything got really tight. Retail, obviously being more of a discretionary category, got really tight. Brands kind of compressed and bigger brands that, were going to live forever went away, got smaller, acquisitions happened. Then all of a sudden, because all of that compression happened, a lot of the newness was taken out of the market. People started to get money again. Entrepreneurs saw opportunities to start new brands and do new things and create new experiences. That kind of was the upswing. And then it happened again, and only the best of those survived. And then it kind of continues to happen again. So I think we're in that down cycle right now where people are getting squeezed. Some brands are not going to make it. But those that do are going to come out stronger and better. And there's going to start to be capital, and the capital will be theirs, and they can use it to grow and take advantage of sort of the next upcycle that we all hope is very near in our future.
Interesting. It's funny how everything is just so extreme, right? There's no balance to this process. It's just human nature. It's so humans are so extreme in their behavior, and therefore markets are very extreme in their behavior, and industries are very extreme in their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, if you make sure that something always has the right fundamentals, again, like if you have a business that makes money and takes care of itself, you'll be okay. I think a lot of the challenge that happened in the last cycle in the downswing was people were buying these brands because they had tons of revenue, but they were buying the sales. You had a $200 million brand that was losing $20 million a year. Well, yeah, it's $200 million, but if you can't get it to profitability quickly, it doesn't matter. You'd rather have, in a down cycle, a $20 million brand that's break even. So people were paying for that growth and paying for sales. And at the end of the day, that changes, and that can change on the dime. But people will always end up paying for true cash flow, to true profitability.
Of course. Yeah, if you're a farmer and you can live off of your own crop, you'll be fine.
Exactly.
Interesting. Wow, what a great conversation, Kate. It was very advanced. That's for sure. For my listeners as well. So I hope this pushed their buttons and their educational limits a little bit.
Well, thank you. No, it was really fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome, Kate. Well, I hope we can have you back on in the future. I'm sure there's a lot of different topics that we can talk about. And yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure my audience learned a lot from this episode.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.